Good evening. On behalf of Delaware Valley Science Fair's Board of Trustees and staff, welcome to our virtual discussion with Delaware Valley Science Fair alumni. DVSF was founded 71 years ago and is one of the first and most successful science organizations in the country. Tonight, we are excited to offer this unique opportunity with our alumni as they share with students, parents, teachers, school administrators, volunteer judges, and others joining us tonight. Before we begin, and I turn it over to tonight's moderator to introduce himself and this evening's panelists, I would like to share a few housekeeping items for the webinar. We are recording this event. You are not permitted to share personal screens or videos, and your sound is muted. Please use Q&A to ask questions of the panelists. You can do so anonymously if you prefer by clicking on the anonymous button. And please use chat to engage with DVSF staff and to ask general questions. And we hope you will find this evening's conversation engaging, and we encourage you to participate in the discussion. So without further ado, I'm excited to introduce tonight's moderator, Rob Stute.
Thank you very much. So I'm Rob Stute, and a quick introduction for me. I'm working for Johnson & Johnson in our R&D Quality and Compliance organization. I am a DVSF alumni from a little while ago, roughly in the same century as our panelists this evening. And at J&J, I'm not using my chemistry background these days, but I'm leading a quality analytics function, looking into how we can use data science to advance how we administer quality oversight for clinical trials. So I would like to introduce our panelists this evening, starting please with Lucy.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm very excited to be able to come back and give back to DVSF, where I've had so many amazing opportunities. I'm currently a medical school student at St. George's University, but it's actually all virtual right now. So it's pretty interesting being able to do a cadaver lab and whatnot all online. I've done science fair for all the years that you could. So 6th grade all the way through 12th grade. I was at DVSF every year and then ISF a few different times, even getting pretty high awards there as well. So I'm very excited to be able to be here with you all tonight.
Awesome, thanks Lucy. Milland.
Hi everybody, thanks for joining the webinar tonight. Like Lucy said, DVSF was a great activity for me to participate in, and I'm definitely excited to, I guess, speak to people who are currently, thinking about doing a science fair project and participating in the fair. And so a bit about me. I am currently a first-year PhD student studying computer science, and I participated in DVSF for 3 years from 2014 to 2016. During that time, I went to ISF a few times, and I also participated in the Intel Science Talent Search and the Siemens competition. Yeah.
Awesome, thank you, Milland. Tejal.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining. My name is Tejal Naik. I'm an attending hospital medicine physician at Jefferson University in Philadelphia. I'm also one of the head clinical liaisons for our digital health innovation group. I did science fair with DVSF for like 3 years in all of high school, and went to ISF a couple of years in there too. And that's basically it.
Thank you, Tejal. And Ellen.
Hi, my name is Ellen Deobaldia. I participated in DVSF for I guess 7 years, a long time ago, most recently in 2004. Hello to Henry Diston, Barbara Lorenzen, Dick Close, everybody on the call, Marty Glassman I saw on the call. It's nice to be reminded of you guys. DVSF was incredible. I majored in biology in college, did a PhD in immunology. Now I'm a postdoc in a neurobiology lab in Rockefeller University in Manhattan, studying mosquito behavior. And all of that is in large part because of DVSF. So excited to be here. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, panel. So we have, I think, a nice conversation queued up tonight that will include a few questions that I want to ask of the panelists. And then we'll turn to the Q&A and take questions from the audience. I believe that in the Q&A, you have the opportunity to interact with the questions by voting or liking them. So as I'm looking through the Q&A, I'll try to pick through the ones that receive votes. So let's dive in. I wanted to start, Lucy, with you. And can you share with the audience, what are some of the skills that you learned through participation in the science fair, the various science fairs that you've done in your life, including DVSF, that have served you well since that time, whether it was giving you a leg up in other competitive situations, confidence boost, or the like?
Absolutely. Science fair is Absolutely amazing. And as Mr. Diston, he always said every year at the award ceremony, science fair will open doors to you that you didn't even know existed. And that is something that I have held close to me and always remembered because it's so, so, so true. As a medical school student now, it's really interesting that being in this whole virtual opportunity, there are a lot of people who are very hesitant to speak up or talk or interact with the professors in office hours or be a leader. And I think that's something that science fair has definitely taught me is being able to speak well in public. There are so many people that are very hesitant to do that in any situation. I think that that is an amazing skill that science fair, just like having to talk, you're a sixth grader and you're talking with these PhDs from all these companies or the military or anything. And that's just something that is, it's really different. And people when they hear science fair, they think, the volcanoes, they don't really think DVSF or ISEF. And then when you explain to them, oh, independent science research, and you're interacting with top scientists from all over the world, it's a really exciting opportunity that people don't really think about. And it helped me in I worked in a hospital or a couple hospitals for a few years as a medical scribe in the ER, and I was able to interact with the physicians there and the nurses and all of the staff, as well as the patients. And I would be able to help, think about diagnostics and whatnot. That skills of critical thinking, thinking on your feet, the analytics, how to just put together a presentation. College was wonderful, and I was a biology pre-med major, but I also did arts. I did theology and literature as my two minors. And being able to think well and write well and have to just come up with a discussion or a conclusion or, being able to do a lit review right off the bat is really unique that a lot of people struggle with and don't get to do until later. But it's been something that science fair, especially DVSF, has just ingrained in us and taught us in a fun, interactive way. It's not like, okay, go look up 10 journals and write an 80-page paper. For my senior thesis when I did that in college, it was not easy, but it was doable because of what science fair taught me. So I'm very, very grateful for everything. Those are just a few. There's myriads more.
Awesome. Thank you, Lucy. Cool reflections there. So, Milland, I want to check in with you and ask, you did well in your competitions throughout the years, even earning a second place at ISEF. Yet your research was maybe not what many would think of as a typical science fair project. So can you talk a bit about what you did and how did you turn your idea into a meaningful science fair project?
Yeah, sure. So I guess I'll start by providing a little bit of context. So kind of the project that I kind of used one project for multiple years of science competitions in high school. So that's kind of a discussion in itself, is that, a project can, when you're a researcher for a career, like projects often last a long time, and it's totally okay for that to be the case. In high school, also you can have projects that build on previous projects and so on. And so the project also was mostly computational and coding based, and in that sense is a little different than a lot of what you hear in guidelines for science fair is kind of based around kind of figuring out your equipment and your experimental setup and so on. And so the reason I kind of decided to pursue a computational project was because the problem I was interested in, I guess, was quite inaccessible for me to work on experimentally. So in 10th grade, kind of when I was looking for a science fair project, I had this kind of question about smartphone touchscreens. And I did a little bit of reading, and I found a project of potential interest, and I did a little bit of experimental work kind of in my basement. But I quickly realized that I guess like studying nanomaterials was maybe a little bit out of what was accessible to me, like in my basement or in my high school facilities. And because I had recently learned programming, I decided to kind of approach the same problem using computer programming and computer simulation. And I found that kind of let me be very independent and kind of guide the research and iterate very quickly. And so I guess kind of maybe the broader lesson from that is that I guess, first of all, your project should obviously be guided by your interests, but first and foremost by your interests. But there is kind of the science fair process is kind of about picking up, new skills a lot of the time. Whether it's learning about new equipment or learning new statistical analysis or even learning how to program. And so it is often worth thinking about, what kind of projects are accessible to you, what skills would help make a project more accessible, and which of those skills can you, learn in the time period of your project.
Awesome. Thanks, Millen. Ellen, you, I believe, are an author of a book about high school research. Can you share from that, experience of writing that book, any key takeaway or learning while you were writing that?
Yeah, sure. So this was in college. I met a lot of people that had also done science fairs, and one of them, Shiv Gaglani, approached me and a bunch of people to come and put together this book. And so we said, okay, what's all the stuff we wish we had known back then? And so we brainstormed, and there's a lot in the book actually about our personal growth journeys through the science fairs, reflections on that. I think some of the most useful information in the book for people who want to do research is about how to approach potential mentors at universities, and how to basically join a lab and make a contribution, but also make a good impression when you're working with people so that they'll keep giving you the opportunity to work with them. I think that's some of the most practical stuff. We do try to give information on how to start a project, but like Millen was talking about, it's very individualized, and I think that's the hardest part, is picking a good project. So we can only give so much advice about that. But we basically just tried to rack our brains and get down on paper everything useful before we forgot it. So I think you can still get a PDF of it online or something. It's a little outdated for terms of virtual times, but the fundamentals of good research don't change that much.
That's really cool. That sounds like a good resource for prospective science fair attendees. So very cool. Tejal, I'd like to ask you, in your experience at DVSF or even other science fairs, interacting with the judges, can you think of any one kind of question or interaction that stuck with you from a DVSF judge that spurred you to do more research, got you thinking down another path, gave you a creative idea, or encouraged you on a certain career path?
I think the biggest one was basically asking me, what would I want to do next? Where do I see this project going? How to apply it? I was like in the health category, in the medicine, and obviously chose a career in medicine. So it definitely shot-putted me towards that direction. I think I had a basic science project. It was like in cancer research. And using the question was basically like, what would you do next? Where would you like to see this go? I was like, oh, I'd like to kind of go into how to apply this, how to take this research, get it from, they say bench to bedside translational research. And in college, I did a biochemical engineering research project where I actually did drug delivery within cardiovascular and cancer research. Then after that, I took a year off and I was doing translational research up at Harvard. And then finally went to like as applied as you can get in in medical school and in the healthcare industry. So I think, getting excited about where things can go and what the next steps are and jumping down that pipeline. It started in DVSF. Otherwise, I probably would have gone to God knows what.
Very cool. Very cool. Thanks, Tejal. I think I can share from my experience of judging at DVSF and other fairs that the learning goes the other way too. It's fascinating. The things that I've learned from interacting with the students and their projects are really cool. The way that the students get the judges thinking. So it's a pretty cool experience. So I am going to look at the Q&A and take a question from there. And I see one from Mr. Close, who was a science teacher of mine actually, and got me into science fairs. So I will read his question. He says, who got you started in your science research career? And what place did your school teachers have in this process? So let me ask Lucy and Ellen, do you maybe want to share a couple of words about that?
Sure, yeah, I can go ahead and start. Science fair is really, it's unique in that it makes you just kind of think outside the box. And one thing that I did is in grade school, I guess, or middle school, the 6th through 8th grade, I really just really looked in the world and, would read the news or hear something and hear about, a topic that I was interested in. And that kind of spurred me on to look at it. But once while I was still in grade school, I had just this idea about Lyme disease and I was really excited about it. And I just started researching on the internet and looking up all of these doctors from Johns Hopkins and all across the country. And yeah, and by then now I'm living in Maryland near Baltimore, but I just wrote to a couple of them and one that I particularly was really interested in, and I said, hey, can you tell me more about this? I have some questions, and could I possibly look at some of this in your lab? And he was so kind, Dr. Steve Dummler at Johns Hopkins. He's now at USIS in the military, but he was so kind and brought me to his lab and taught me about the Lyme disease research. And then his coworker and best friend, Dennis Grab, the two of them really just took me under their wings. And I was too young at that point per Hopkins age requirement to work there yet. I was still too young, but I still kept in contact with them. And then as soon as I was old enough, I went there and I worked there for years. And they've continued to mentor me to this day. They wrote letters for me for med school. I even started a research lab at my college. So I went to Wheeling Jesuit University in West Virginia, which is very tiny. And I wanted to bring my research to West Virginia because Lyme disease is so prevalent in Appalachia. And I brought it there, and they helped me get the Borrelia, the bacteria. They helped me get it from Johns Hopkins to West Virginia. And it was just really, it's not that, so many teachers and mentors, it's never a once and done thing. So many of them continue to give back. And I know I'm still friends with Mrs. Lorenzon and Mr. Close. And it's just, they're so giving, and it's amazing how much they just throw themselves into everything. And I still text Dr. Dummler and Dr. Grab to this day that it's really, really selfless. And I think that without wonderful mentors, science fair and research would not be possible. So I'm very, very, very grateful.
Awesome. Thanks, Lucy. Ellen, any reflection?
So I just always loved biology, and that was probably greatly influenced by my mother, who was a clinical microbiologist. So she worked in Cooper Hospital in Camden, New Jersey. So I went there to her lab. She managed a bunch of medical technologists and testing patient samples, and she just loved. It's nice for me to talk about my mom because she's since passed away, but she loved to talk about bacteria and parasites and fungi. and foodborne illness. And anytime you eat a food, she'd tell you what foodborne illness you might be at risk of. And she was just the best. And so definitely that was a huge influence. We did some of our early projects at night. We would drive into Cooper Hospital in Camden, not the safest place in the country, but we had a blast, like doing some experiments there with kind of whatever we found we thought of. You know, it was pretty ad hoc, I think is the word. Another great thing that we did just on the topic of starting projects was, I remember one of my first projects, I think I basically got the idea from looking in the Carolina Biological Supply Catalog, which is a great resource for teachers in biology to get biological materials. So I ordered these vinegar eels, like nematodes, and then I was culturing them at home in my laundry room, and I couldn't see them under the microscope, and then we had to filter them through a coffee filter, which was my mom's idea. Admittedly, like the whole thing would have been a disaster if not for that. But so, you know, my point is, like, I think, you know, later I worked in a lab at the University of Pennsylvania with Susan Ross, who's now at University of Illinois. But I cold emailed her, and I also sent her a letter because I didn't know if she read emails back then because it was so new. But, you know, so it's kind of like, hopefully, like maybe you graduate to working in a professional lab setting, but there's actually a lot that you can do at home. You know, there's organisms you can culture at home and things like that. I had some really good science teachers at Morristown Township Public High School in New Jersey. And particularly stands out is Louise Pascal, who taught me the importance of measurement error and recording data and understanding basically how you can be sure, you know, I think when I first started science fairs, I didn't understand the concept of measurement error to where I would think that things were different, that they're just not different. So that stands out as a way that, like, my science teachers, something that I still use today. But yeah, it was a wild ride, a great adventure for my family. Both my sisters did the science fair, so we kind of had a little community within our house. And then Lisa and Christy, they're on the call actually, I think. And I just wanted to say, then once we were participating longer and we went to DVSF and the ISEF, we made friends outside of our school that were participating with this. So we could talk to them during the year and kind of be like, oh, hey, how's it going with your project? Like, what's going on? Because our high school didn't have a big community. I mean, we had some people doing it, but not all that many.
Very nice. I know for me, you know, the 30+ year career I've had in pharmaceutical R&D, largely credit to my dad and my 7th grade teacher, Mr. Close, who got me into science and science fairs and taught me that it was both fun and stimulating in terms of intellectual curiosity. So really, really big impact there. So I want to look at a next question, which asks, and Milind and Tejal, I'll check in with you on this question. In the science fair, sometimes it's a collaborative effort, and sometimes it's an individual effort. So what did you learn from the science fairs in terms of collaboration? Are you working collaboratively now in what you do? And did you find it difficult to move from likely what was an individual effort at the science fair to collaborative work or collaborative research? So maybe Milind first.
Yeah, sure. So my science fair projects in high school were all, you know, mostly individual projects. But I think actually there's obviously other factors in collaborative work, which I've taken on more of recently, but there are some things you learn even from doing individual projects that are useful for collaboration. So I guess, like, maybe like figuring out how to organize your individual project, like kind of what are the separate things that need to be done here. This kind of breaking up of a problem is also useful for collaboration when you need to kind of figure out how are people going to work in parallel on this? What are the different things that need to be done? And I think kind of the process of preparing for your presentation in science fairs, I think in many ways shares some aspects with kind of the iterative communication you'll do, and I've been doing anyway in collaborative projects later on, where I guess maybe now that I'm collaborating more with people, we'll kind of meet fairly frequently, briefly show what we've done recently, get some feedback. You'll hear some questions from your collaborators that maybe surprise you. And it's kind of just a bite-sized, faster version of what happens when you show all your results kind of at once in the science fair, and you get a whole bunch of questions. And so I think kind of the new skills that I've had to pick up recently in collaborative environments are, like figuring out, like kind of learning the work styles and the organization styles of your collaborators, which is different each time. And then also kind of doing this whole organization cycle and sharing your results kind of faster, and not just, after 3 or 4 months, which is what it was like in high school.
Nice. Tejal, any reflections on moving from individual research to collaborative work?
I would say both sides of the jobs that I do are like basically 100% collaborative, where either I'm on, at least these days, 8 to 9 hours of Zoom meetings with designers, programmers, other innovators, business, marketing, salespeople, and we're all in the same group. We're in the same innovative group, and we have to like learn how to come with what our skill sets are and learn how to communicate with all different individuals with other specific expertise. I think science fair, like kind of this was touched upon before, that learning the scientific method is huge, and learning how that you can apply that in not just science, but any other kind of field is, I think, one of the greatest takeaways from science fair in general. And the other part of that, the 1B of that, would be communication and how to clearly, effectively communicate. And that happens, again, with not just in this innovation group, but me talking to my patients or the nursing staff or some other individuals, where I have to take my expertise, my high level knowledge about the subject matter, distill it down into bite-sized digestible pieces and communicate that with my patient and whoever. And that's a very collaborative approach. It's not like, me throwing out orders and saying, this is what you have to do. It's more like, hey, this is where I'm coming from, where are you coming from? How can we collaborate and make sure both interests are in mind and we're working toward a similar goal?
Nice, thanks, Tejal. There's another question about science fair in the virtual environment, and I think that's an important one for our current situation and for the upcoming science fair. So maybe in a brief sense, I'd love to hear from each of you, reflecting back on your projects or your experience. If you were to conduct that today and have to present your project in a virtual setting, do you have any thoughts on what kind of adaptations you might make, how you might get across your key points in a virtual setting as opposed to in-person judging? And the question asks, how will the science fair work in the virtual environment? I'm sure that DVSF will have information on the logistics and workings of the virtual fair. But just as, reflecting back, panel, as in your experience, anything that you would adapt for a virtual setting? Maybe starting, with Lucy.
Sure. One thing that I think is really neat, I'm a part of multiple different professional societies, and going to those different meetings, there's always one opportunity that's really neat. It's like the elevator talk, and you have to be able to distill your research into, as Tejal was saying, to a level that everybody can understand, and also be able to talk about it in a very short amount of time, and then virtually. So I think kind of thinking about it like that as something that I know in ISEF, we would always have the public day, which they would bus all kids from all over the city in, and you would, I mean, you'd be talking about high level research with, PhDs and MDs one moment, and then the next, or on Wednesday for judging day, and then the next day you're talking with kindergartners, and you're like, how do you do that? So I think that the elevator speech is really a neat way to think about it. It's not, oh wow, I don't get to interact with the judges as much anymore, but how can I perfect my research perfectly? I know for judging day, I would always, have to go through my presentation a few times before it was just right. But to be able to do that and then be able to have that perfect, well rehearsed knowledge of what you want to share, I think that's a cool way to think about it.
That's, yeah, an incredibly important skill to be able to summarize and get the key points across. Nice. Tejal, any thoughts just on what you would think in a virtual fair?
I think it's actually a very interesting, timely predicament per se. I don't think it's actually a problem. I think I actually see it as like a pretty strong opportunity. I know we're used to, having a nice trifold poster board and coming up with as imaginative or as visual posters as we could. But in this setting, like right before this meeting, I came off like a 2-hour pitch meeting with higher ups in my group, and that was on Zoom, and that was done on a virtual setting. And you'd be surprised how many people don't get the experience, whether it's talking in front of a group of people on Zoom, whether that's presenting a poster presentation, or even just talking about your work, and how many people will go through high school, college, even professional school and never get a chance of doing that. So it's a unique area where you try to really build a story, and how can you basically share what's up in here and what's on the presentation with everyone else. But it's a great place to trial and error and gain that experience, I believe.
Nice. Milind, anything to add on the virtual setting?
Yeah, so I guess this will depend on the specific format that different science fairs or DVSF in particular take on. But one thing that comes to mind is that I guess like at every science fair I did in high school, at least one judge would have a question that surprised me, or that I hadn't necessarily planned for. And I guess if the opportunity for interaction with the judges is reduced or more difficult, or for like a back and forth with the judges is a little harder virtually, I think there maybe is a bigger emphasis, I guess, on getting feedback from more people beforehand to kind of get a sense of what some reactions might be, I guess. If maybe you won't have time to respond, like go back and forth with judges as many times for whatever reason. But again, this will depend on, I guess, the specifics of the format, but that's maybe something I would keep in mind.
Yeah, that's a really nice suggestion, interesting insight. Thank you. Ellen, I'm thinking maybe you'll need a revision 2 of the book to deal with success in the virtual setting, but any thoughts?
Yeah, so I gave a talk at a society meeting this summer. So I had to pre-record the talk, which was actually not as bad as I thought, because I could, record a couple slides at a time. And if I messed one up, I went back and I did it again. It's a little odd not speaking to somebody face to face. There's not as much eye contact and things like that. I didn't figure this out in time for my talk then, but apparently there's a way to superimpose a little picture of yourself on the PowerPoint slide so that people can, I still need to learn how to do this. Maybe you guys can teach me, but like so that they can look at your slides and then see you describing what you did, and maybe even to have some kind of like whiteboard function. Or I would just say, the guidelines for the science fair presentation are also the same as kind of like when I give talks now or give people feedback on talks now, which is to keep the slides really simple. The audience can only look at one place at a time. So, make sure they know what they should be looking at when you're talking about it, just like you would point to a specific part on the board. My mentor, Leslie Vosshall at Rockefeller, she teaches us to put the conclusion of the slide at the top of the slide, so that people can, if they space out for a second, they can get back on board. Hopefully everybody will be listening, following as closely as they can, but it does happen, right? The other thing is, one thing I learned in my science fair days, but now it's just been drilled into my brain now. I remember specifically one of my projects, I felt it had a really exciting conclusion, and sometimes I would present it and I would save that conclusion for the end. And since then I've learned that it's better to tell people up front, don't keep the talk as a mystery story, just tell them like, I found this really cool thing and I'm going to tell you now how I got there. But then they have motivation to keep listening. So the lab that I work in, we call that bluff, bottom line up front. I would say if the presentations I can't imagine they're going to be that much longer than 15 minutes. Maybe they're even a lot shorter. So you probably have to pick one or two big points that you want the audience to take home from your talk. And then, enough background to get there. I always thought the logbook was a really important part of the process, and kind of like the raw data. So I think it's a fun opportunity to, use pictures, use videos that you couldn't use that easily in person. I would like to see, I always like when people give talks for them to walk me through the graphs and the actual data and tell me, why do you think this is different? Or how do you know what were your controls? I like to engage with people on the data. So I would say that's, I think, the heart of the research. So I would encourage people to, show us your data and tell us how you got it and what it means.
Awesome. So I'm looking at the time. We have about a little under a quarter of an hour left. So what I'll do now, I'll take some of these questions and just pass them to one of the panelists and check in on your reflections on these. So here's a question from Ray Sweet and Lucy. I'll see if you have any thoughts on this question. Do you have any suggestions for how DVSF could improve your student experience, reflecting back on the fairs you attended?
Sure, absolutely. I think DVSF has always done an amazing job. I can't really think of much that I would improve on, except I guess something with the virtual is that, I guess judging day won't be quite as exhausting and tiring. But I think just making sure that everybody has a lot of fun and enjoying the process just as much as we all enjoyed it. I know I am still friends with many of my colleagues that I met in science fair, and at ISEF you become such good friends for that week that you're together, and it's just really exciting. So I think just to continue to keep that same enthusiasm and make sure that just because it's virtual doesn't mean that it has to lose the charm of standing and presenting and getting to share your research and being able to interact with the judges. And I think that is a huge thing. Make sure that the students can definitely interact with the judges, because that's an opportunity unlike any other.
Nice, thank you. And it's an important question, so I won't ask everyone to weigh in, but anyone else, did you have a key insight on that you wanted to share? No, good. Thanks, Lucy. So tapping into the idea then of fun, Lucy, there's a question, and Ellen, you're mentioned in this question, so I'll pass the question to you. It asks, when Ellen was speaking, the audience member imagined having the opportunity to play in Mom's lab and the fun you had growing organisms in the laundry room. So can you speak to aspects of fun and play in the science fair projects? And does that carry forward into your current experience and the career that you're advancing through?
Yes, so luckily, yes, it does. I'm having fun playing with mosquitoes now. So I work in a lab. I mean, it has not always been this much fun, but I think it should be fun. I think people take science too seriously. Once or twice, my PhD advisor told me I didn't take it seriously enough, but I thought I took it plenty seriously. I think it should be fun also. You know, you don't have to be like this slave to the lab, like chain yourself to the bench and work all night long in order to do good work. I work for Leslie Vosshall, who I mentioned. She's a good follow on Twitter if you're interested. She's a scientist, but she wears these like crazy designer outfits and hats, and she is just a blast to be around. She's really funny. But she's not super stodgy. She doesn't think that you can't have interests outside of science. I think it's super important to be a good scientist, to rest, have time to think about what you're doing. Many people don't think enough about what they're doing because they're too much of go, get the experiments done. And I love to do experiments, but it's really important to take a day off to think. I actually canceled my experiment tomorrow because of the snow, and I'm looking forward to just taking time to read papers and just revisit what am I doing. I'm studying, just by the way, I'm studying why mosquitoes are more attracted to some humans than others. So I hope that I'll figure that out and you'll see a nice paper about it soon. But I really encourage people to find labs that are a good fit, a good environment, a caring mentor who has time to spend with you, who's excited to work with you because you have something special to offer. That's something I think even when I was younger, I didn't understand as much as I understand now, that every single person has a different take on something. And a lot of things are super interesting once you dig into them. So, you know, find something and just start to explore. And, you know, a lot of people will be very willing to help you if you've taken some initiative.
Yeah, true. Very nice. Thank you, Ellen. So, Milind, I want to ask you this question about, are there any stories that you can share from times when you were afraid that your concept for a project may not work out, right? Where you had some doubts about the concept. And was there a trigger point where you somehow got the inspiration or the confidence to either double down or to forge ahead?
Yeah, so this is a really important question, and this is something I deal with, I think, with pretty much every idea. Like, you spend a little bit just second guessing, like, oh, is this actually a good idea? Is this feasible? And so, kind of now as a graduate student, I guess I kind of have a procedure for dealing with this. And I guess my approach is just come up with, I guess, a series of easy checkpoints or sanity checks, things that, you know, if I can't do this, or if this doesn't work, then the idea is probably not worth following up on, and try to make these things that you can do, you know, in a week or two. And that way, you know, the stakes are never that high, and you're never that stressed, and like, it's not that much time that you're kind of burning to explore this idea. And I guess I should say, you know, this is all coming from the perspective of a computationalist. So maybe it's not so easy to do a 1 week iteration if you need equipment. But I think the principle probably still works to some extent. And I guess another thing I would say is that it's actually like, it's very fine to, I shouldn't say fine, it can be very exciting to even just try to replicate studies or try to kind of explore results further or expand on something that someone has already done and that you're quite confident should work. In fact, like a large fraction of published work, in fact, is not reproducible. That's a whole nother discussion. But you can make your project safer while keeping it very exciting. If you kind of start from something that someone's already done and try to go really deep and explore it. And in fact, the project that I did in high school, the entire like first year of that and what I used for DVSF was just replicating some old results and exploring them a little bit further. So I think that's a viable strategy also.
Yeah, good insights there. I think outside of computational science, there are plenty of applications too for taking a problem and breaking it down into solvable chunks and iterating towards your goal. So nice. Tejal, I want to ask you, a question from Mr. Close talks about all of you on the panel being amazing researchers in DVSF days. Since that time, how have you improved in terms of conducting research, or what has changed between then and now to help you be a better researcher?
For me personally, I think I've taken a little bit of a non-traditional route than other people in terms of what kind of research. I think I've put my hand in every kind of research bucket there is, whether it's basic science, engineering, translational, clinical, which is all, I think, what helped me kind of going back to the scientific method, being able to tackle a problem, how to be a problem solver, how to come up with the best experiment, the best design for an experiment to take to kind of solve my problem. I have been someone who's always liked a diverse level of ideas, diverse problems. I've been always looking for different things. I don't like kind of being stuck under one bucket really. So I've been always trying to explore different ideas, different places, take my skill set, on the road basically. And I think that's really helped me a lot. And I think that's really helped me understand what does it mean to run a scientific experiment. And even in the business world with entrepreneurial experience, they do basically the scientific method. They're looking at background of a problem. They're looking at, what do you want to do to say this makes sense, this idea, and you kind of go and try to prove it by, whatever kind of studies you want to do. And at the end of the day, come up with a solution and discuss why this makes sense. And, that happens all the time in the clinical field. You could probably see with all this COVID stuff going on. So, really instead of being very siloed in one direction, I've kind of split it, but I think it's really worked for me in my career.
Very nice. Awesome. Well, we're winding down on time. I know, apologies, Lucy, I missed a chat from you earlier that you had a thought on something. So let's do this. We have a couple of minutes left. So each of the panelists, if you have just 20 or 30 seconds, based on the questions that came in tonight, the discussion, Lucy, if you want to touch on the insight you had on one of the previous questions, just share, 20 or 30 seconds of a closing thought each. So Lucy, I'll come to you first.
Sure. I just wanted to kind of go off of what Millen was saying and that question about, what happens when your research doesn't work. I think it's really important that you can and probably should fail in science fair and in science and in research. And it's really, really important that it's okay. I know one year I got an award from DuPont, and the judge, he brought me up on stage and he said, if you want to know how to not make ethanol, talk to Lucy. And like, I failed and I still did amazingly well in that science fair and learned so much. So I think failure is not this big bad thing that we see like an F on our report card. In research, it's an exciting opportunity to say, okay, this didn't work, go to the next option. And so failure is not something to be afraid of. It's just another opportunity.
Yeah, indeed, and fail fast sometimes built into that iterating to your goal. So Ellen, any closing thoughts from you?
Yeah, I would just say, you know, find something that feels fun to you or interesting to you or a problem you want to solve. Science is really difficult, as Lucy said. That doesn't change. That doesn't change as you get even more experienced. So I will just say it's important to design experiments that are interpretable, that give you an interpretable result, even if it's a negative result. So maybe talk to your teachers and mentors as you're designing experiments to figure out, like, is this a good experiment before I do it? Hopefully, and then if not, you can figure it out later and do better the next time. But interpretable is great. Positive or negative results. Just keep going.
Nice. Tejal, any quick closing thought from you?
Yeah. First, thanks for having me. Hopefully this is valuable for everyone. Really the biggest thing is, you know, I love science. Everyone here, I'm sure, loves science. Not to say that there is a world outside of science, but I want to say that the skills that you learn from this, the experience that you gain from DVSF, ISF, any kind of science fair, is very, very, very valuable and translatable to whether you go into business, whether you go into sales, whether you go into sports, whether you stay in science. So I think that's one thing that should be definitely encouraging and a strong selling point for individuals to be part of the science fair experience, because like whether it's communication, whether it's critical thinking, problem solving, just even learning about how to do research or like into an idea, way to be adapting, whether it's doing video poster sessions or whether it's doing in-person poster sessions. All of that is just super valuable in terms of whatever anyone's going to end up doing. So I know I have friends from science fair that went to completely different things, but they will all say that their experience that they gained from DVSF and doing science fair helped propel them in and help them be successful in those careers.
Nice. Milind, closing thought for the audience?
Yeah, so kind of along the same lines as what Lucy and Ellen mentioned is like, you can't really like a lot of great ideas don't end up working out for reasons that no, even like the best scientists couldn't have foreseen. And so I think you really should let your interest and your curiosity and your learning kind of drive first and foremost, in addition to some other things, but that should be the most important thing driving kind of what project you decide to do. And you shouldn't necessarily like, yeah, beat yourself up if some random thing makes your project not work out. And you definitely shouldn't, I guess, try to pick a project based on being the thing that's most likely to like win awards and be successful in these type of things.
Very nice. Very nice. Thank you. Amazing, great conversation and really cool insights tonight. Thank you all. Thank you to the panel. So thank you to the audience for joining the discussion this evening, participating with your questions and chat items. A special thanks to our panel for sharing their experiences and thoughts. We ask that you take the short survey to give us feedback on tonight's event. It will be helpful in planning future events. The 2021 Science Fair will be virtual in the spring. Participants will be drawn from the 13 affiliated regional fairs listed on the DVSF website. Date dates of the virtual fair are March 30th to April 12th. And there's a lot of information posted on the dvsf.org website. So thank you again for joining, and good night all.